as a distinguished lecturer. Craig grew up here nearby in Severna Park in Maryland. And then from a very early childhood, he discovered his passion for mathematics, sciences, computer science, and artificial intelligence. This is at a time when AI was not what the buzzword it is now. He went to Michigan State and did his undergraduate degree in mathematics in 1983. And then he came to University of Maryland to pursue his PhD degree, which he received in 1983. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. So his undergraduate degree was 1978. Oh, no. And I'm being recorded, and this whole lecture, including my introduction, will be on YouTube soon. Thank you, Craig. So one of the things which was very striking, his PhD advisor at that time was Chuck Rieger, and we were reconstructing who all were in his PhD dissertation committee, and we are joined today by Professor Hanan Samet, who was in his committee. Hanan, can you raise your hand? Oh, hey, there's Hanan. And that's right. And Professor Dana now is also here. And so in some ways, his PhD dissertation was the precursor to what we know as AI today. And he had a very imaginative title to his PhD dissertation: Form and Function, Representation of a Machine. And this is, in that time, just very, very, pioneering in so many ways. After his graduation in 1983, he went and joined Thinking Machines Corporation. Now, at that time, Thinking Machines was an amazing company. So I remember, because at that time I was also started working in computer science. When you talked about parallel computing, you talked about 2 to 4 processors. And when you talked about highly parallel computing, you talked about 8 to 16 processors. Now, Thinking Machines at that time had 16,000 to 32,000 processors in their machines. So this was several orders of magnitude more. And then we didn't even have a name for it. And the name that emerged slowly after that was massively parallel computing, because what could you call such a machine with so many processors? And so in Thinking Machines, Craig did a lot of pioneering, foundational, inspiring work on what has later on come to be known as machine learning, information retrieval, and scalable computing. Then in 1994, he started his company called Ab Initio Software. This company did a lot of highly parallel, scalable, high-performance enterprise computing. He was the chief architect of the software that carries out, that is the brains behind a lot of this enterprise class computing, and a number of Fortune 500 companies today are his customers from the worlds, especially from the worlds of banking and telecommunications. Throughout this time, Craig has been a staunch supporter of the University of Maryland, along with his wife, Sharon, who did her undergraduate degree also in computer science. So welcome, Sharon. And we're also pleased that he's joined by his mother, his 2 sisters, and the brothers-in-law. So a very hearty welcome to the entire Stanfill family. We are very pleased to have you all join us today here. So with that, I also wanted to mention that the philanthropy of the Stanfills has been quite striking. And one of the signature classrooms that we have in the Brendan Ereep Computer Science and Engineering building is the Stanfill classroom. So in 2015, he and Sharon donated this money to resource this classroom. And today, it is by far, with no questions asked, the best classroom on the entire campus. You have to visit it. It's room number 1116 on the first floor. One full wall of the classroom is glass. The rest of the classroom is arranged in these circular tables. And no matter which table you are sitting on, there'll always be screens in front of you. So in some ways, it's the future of classrooms. It's how collaborative classes will be held. So with that, Craig, we are very pleased and delighted to welcome you here. And please tell us how strange of a journey it has been.
Hi there. First of all, I would like to thank Amitabh for the opportunity to return to my alma mater today to give this talk, and also to thank you in the audience for taking the time to listen to the stories I am about to tell. I hope you will find it entertaining, and I hope you will find them useful as you navigate your own careers and perhaps help your colleagues, students, and friends to navigate theirs. How did I come to be here, you may ask? I can't claim any great prominence in the world of science academia. A few of my papers continue to be cited, and I co-founded a software company that, while successful and important within its industry, is not widely known. Neither I nor my company are household words. I am scarcely the sort of person one would normally expect to be delivering the CMNS Dean's Distinguished Lecture. So how did I come to be here before you today? The answer to that lies in the stories I've accumulated over nearly 40 years as a working scientist. One afternoon, at a lunch with Dean Amitabh and others, I shared some of these stories, and he thought that they might hold some lessons worth passing on. So here I am. And so I will tell you the story of my career as a scientist, entrepreneur, inventor, and now author, the sort of life most of your students will go on to, as well as many of you sitting in this room, if you decide to make it a go of it in academia. University of Maryland, 1978 to 83. I arrived at the University of Maryland in September of 1978 with no idea what it meant to be a grad student, but full of enthusiasm. Jack Meeker was the department chair at the time. Azriel Rosenfeld was running a thriving computer vision program. Hanan Samet, here in the audience, John Gannon, sadly deceased, Levine Canal, Ashok Agrawala, Victor Basale, Marvin Zelkowitz, and many others still associated with the department were teaching. It was an exciting and a stimulating environment, to say the least. I was fortunate to be picked up by Chuck Rieger, given a research fellowship, and I set about learning how to be a scientist. I picked a topic in the area of knowledge representation, a subfield of AI, learned to be fluent in Lisp, and spent long nights banging away on MIMSI, the department's first computer. It was the dawn of the internet during the Usenet epoch. Email was new and cool, but mostly used within the department. It was at that time that life served up the first of many curveballs I was to encounter along the way, when Chuck resigned from the department to focus his energies on entrepreneurship. I did not at the time appreciate the perils of being orphaned in this fashion, but Chuck made sure that every one of his students finished their degrees, and Mark Weiser adopted me and others when he joined the department about that time. I will forever owe Mark a debt of gratitude that I can never repay. From the department, I acquired a deep and broad education in computer science and the ability to generalize and create abstractions, skills which have given me the intellectual foundation to thrive in a continually changing world and to put my inventions into practice. It was during this period that some of the patterns of my career first manifested themselves. I was a prolific programmer, one of those guys who would sit at a keyboard banging out code for 18 hours at a time with scarcely a break, 1,000 lines at a sitting. This has been my greatest strength as a technologist, the ability to translate my eyes into code and architecture. I was not, however, much of a scholar. Given the choice of coding, reading, or authoring a paper, coding always won. In due course, I defended my thesis, which was forgotten as soon as it was written, with Chuck Rieger, Hanan Samet, present here, Jim Regia, Lindsay Darden, and Dana Now, also here sitting on my committee. My degree was awarded in December 1983. And this is the first lesson I would like to share with you. Know yourself, know your goals, know your strengths, and learn broadly. I dreamed at that point in my career I dreamed at that point of a career in academia, but my natural inclinations lay elsewhere. I don't think I would have made a good professor, but I've had one hell of a career as an inventor. Thinking machines, part one, the beginning. In fall of 1983, my thesis was nearing completion, and I began looking for a job. I got a couple of nibbles for faculty positions, but it was at that time my weakness as a scholar became manifest, and I did not get hired. Truth be told, I didn't try all that hard. Then one day, Chuck pointed me in the direction of Danny Hillis and this company he was starting, which would come to be known as Thinking Machines. I interviewed, got a job, and in November, I moved to Cambridge at the end of a crazy week in which I defended my thesis, packed up my apartment, made revisions as requested by my committee, and proposed marriage to my wife, Sharon. She drove me home in a coma after I handed out my dissertation. That's when I popped the question. Back-to-back double all-nighters. Yeah. I couldn't do that anymore. Thinking Machines was at the time modeled as a think tank, aiming to follow a long-time research program on a variety of topics surrounding AI. It was a crazy and idiosyncratic place with its headquarters in a 19th century estate in Waltham, Massachusetts, Lisp machines cluttering the hallways, a very MIT sort of a place. At that time, I began to flounder a bit. I had no clear research goals, no external direction, and my career as a scientist might well have ended in that time period, but for the arrival of David Wallace on the scene. David Wallace, by the way, is one of the pioneers in artificial intelligence, one of the most respected figures in the field, and it was a distinct honor to have worked with him for a period of 10 years. Anyway, he took me under his wing, gave me direction, and mentored me in a way that changed my life. And it was not a one-way street. It was a productive collaboration from which we both reaped immense benefits. And this is the second lesson which I would like to share with you. There is no more perilous time in the career of a young scientist than the first few years after graduation, when it is easy to lose focus. When you take your first job after graduation, you will need a mentor, someone to help you develop your talents and steer you in the right direction. And on the other side of things, always be on the lookout for that talented but struggling youngster. The wise old man and the hungry young buck is and always has been a recipe for mutual success. Thinking Machines, Part 2. In 1985, Thinking Machines brought out its first parallel computer, the Connection Machine Model CM1. It was a crazy research computer with 65,536 bit serial processors and a teeny-weeny amount of memory. It seemed like a toy, but we were determined to prove otherwise. In the lead up to the release of the machine, David Wallace and Brewster Kahle came to me one day with an idea to use the Connection Machine for information retrieval. I ran with the idea and went on one of my wild coding binges. A few months later, I had a complete demonstration system, including a user interface, incorporating then novel ideas for quote unquote natural language interfaces, the sort that you use every day. Everyone loved it. Today we take this sort of technology for granted, but in 1985, most information retrieval systems used complex Boolean logic that requires significant training and were difficult to use. And then one day, David and I were chatting after a demonstration. We had this eerie feeling that this text search engine was manifesting something like intelligence. You could ask it a question and get something that looked like an answer. Could we do AI with it? After another coding binge, I was able to create something we called memory-based reasoning, using a best match algorithm similar to that which was used in the text retrieval system. It worked. This was to prove the apex of my publication career, when I had two papers in a special issue of the Communications of the ACM, one with David and one with Brewster, describing both sets of results. One of these, the one on memory-based reasoning, continues to be heavily cited to this day. It was a great success, and afterward I made what proved a fateful decision. I wanted to go one step further beyond simply writing papers, to create technologies and bring them to market. I had begun my transition from a scientist to a technologist and inventor. And this is the third lesson I would like to share with you. Be aware when your career has reached a fork in the road and make a mindful decision. You can't do everything. I chose to capitalize on my early success by veering into technology rather than publication. I could have chosen the other route, and as with other choices I made in my career, my life would now be different. Not necessarily better, but different. The CM1 was a toy, and the company could have stopped there and gone on as a think tank, but we then set out to do something nobody had ever done before, to build a commercially viable MPP. We identified our target markets. Information retrieval was one, artificial intelligence another, but we were also drawn in a new, unforeseen direction, scientific computing. We got a lot of money from DARPA. The national labs wanted to use MPPs to help them build atom bombs, and who were we to say no? We gave the machine a lot more memory, added floating point coprocessor to do the heavy lifting, and in 1988, we brought out the connection machine CM2. As for my own work, we hired a development team to commercialize our information retrieval work, and eventually sold a system to Dow Jones and Company as the DowQuest system. For the first time, parallel computing and information retrieval were married in a commercial system available to the general public. It was a technological triumph, but not a commercial one. The CM2 did not have enough memory to index a significant amount of data. I wrote some papers on what we could have done if we had the right I/O system, and I tried to get it built, but that never happened, dooming the information retrieval effort to commercial irrelevance. Meanwhile, the internet was beginning to boom. People discovered the joys of web surfing, and we could tell something important was brewing. In 1989, Brewster left Thinking Machines to form the Waze Company, eventually founding the Internet Archive and to become one of the first .com billionaires. I chose not to follow him, continuing my work with David Wallace, and we assembled a research group to work on outgrowths of memory-based reasoning. We experimented with a variety of techniques for parallel database AI, nearest neighbors, neural networks, logistic regression, and other things which have become foundational to AI as we know it today. This also proved difficult to commercialize, not because of any technical shortcomings, but because the market was not yet ready. And this is the fourth lesson I want to share with you. If you find yourself unable to follow your dreams in your current situation, follow Brewster's example and move on. As for myself, I found new dreams to pursue, dreams which would lead me to places I had never expected to go. In the summer of 1989, I was invited by Jim Gray and David DeWitt, among the most prominent members of the database community, to deliver a talk at the 6th International Workshop on Database Machines, in what was to become one of the pivotal events of my career. It was then that I became aware that Teradata Corporation, which produced a parallel database machine, was the leading vendor of parallel technology, not Thinking Machines. But there was nothing that they did that we couldn't do, so I started focusing my research on data. At that time, I was leading a small team under David, and I started a project which we called Datascope. It combined parallel data processing, exploratory data analysis, neural networks, and model fitting tools with a visualization system. All of this ought to sound familiar. We call it AI today. However, as happened before, this proved difficult to commercialize. The market was not yet ready. Then one day, a guy named David Tang at American Express contacted us with a database problem that he thought we might be able to tackle. At that time, American Express would piggyback little advertising flyers on top of your credit card bill, and this was a major portion of their revenue. The back-end computer system in support of this business had, however, reached the limits of its capabilities. Their weekly mainframe job was taking 6.5 days, and if they missed their processing window, it could cost them millions of dollars. IBM and Teradata had tried to solve this problem and failed, so they called us in. I took on the project, binged out some code, and proved that we could more than hit their numbers. I remember the day we presented the results to their headquarters next to the World Trade Center. How much will it cost, they asked. Our salesman hemmed and hawed. $15 million? We were sure they would balk, but they didn't bat an eyelash. Damn, I said to myself, I want to sell to these people. They have money, and they have problems that I can solve. AI, information retrieval, and all that went by the wayside. I was now a data guy. And this is the fifth lesson I want to share with you. It may sound craven, but if you want to succeed as a technologist, follow the money. It's how you know that something is truly important, not just interesting. I am now going to tell you the story of the final generation of the connection machine, the CM5. We scrapped the single instruction, multiple data architecture and went for a multiple instruction, multiple data architecture built around floating point computation. There was, at the time, a war raging in the parallel computing market between these two architectures, and there was considerable fear that if word got out that we were changing sides, sales of the CM2 would fall off a cliff and we would go out of business. The project was therefore conducted in the utmost secrecy, walled off in a separate space, inaccessible to most of the staff. You can imagine what this did to morale. And then the technical missteps began. A year into the project, we abandoned the custom processor architecture we were working on in favor of commodity microprocessor chips. They threw away everything they had done to date and re-architected the machine around the Sun Viking microprocessor. And then the Viking microprocessor was late, and its floating point performance was not nearly what had been promised. So we were forced to begin a second redesign, this time combining a microprocessor with a floating point coprocessor, that thing that is now known as a GPU. We had bullseyed the architecture of the future, but by now the project was way behind schedule. Nevertheless, it achieved its goals, and for a while, the CM5 was the hottest machine on the planet. It would be impossible to overstate how disruptive this was to the software side of the house. We had spent 4 years building up the programming environment for the CM1 and the CM2, and scarcely a line of code could be salvaged. My own projects suffered greatly, and I had to start again from scratch. It was, however, a good opportunity for my new work in data management. The CM5 was a far more natural platform for that class of problem than either the CM1 or the CM2. And this is the sixth lesson I would like to share with you. Technology is a long-term investment built up year by year. Transitions of this sort are fraught with peril, especially when you start throwing away massive amounts of your own technology. In most cases, evolutionary wins out over revolutionary. While the CM5 was being birthed, I was finally able to convince the company to invest in data technology in a big way. The American Express Quantum project had yet to be delivered, but the magnitude of that particular sale was sufficient to convince the company to back this technology in a big way, forming the Business Supercomputing Group. One of our team members, Steve Smith, picked up the AI work in the form of the Darwin project, while I focused on building parallel relational databases called Decision SQL. It was an innovative design combining a parallel database engine with a file structure specialized for decision support. We lined up a customer, MCI, ran a benchmark, and hit the ball out of the park. It had all the markings of a runaway success, but alas, it came too late. Thinking Machines was beginning to struggle. During this period, I was doing some of my best work to date. The algorithms and data organization in Decision SQL were exactly right for this sort of application, and it was a timely offering too. Parallel databases were becoming mainstream, with IBM bringing out a parallel version of DB2 on their MPP, and Oracle also building a parallel system. We engaged with a number of companies in the database industry, setting up meetings with Oracle, Informix, and Ingres. We even did a port of Oracle to the CM5, but those partnerships never went anywhere. I don't know that I have any lessons to share with you from this period of my career. I built some technology, assembled a team, gotten the company to focus resources on commercializing my research. My work was commercially viable, and great things were surely in store. And then disaster struck. On the surface, everything seemed to be fine. The CM5 was the hottest computer in the industry, literally a movie star. It appeared as a set prop in Jurassic Park. Beneath the surface, however, things were starting to fall apart. First of all, the CM5 never lived up to its potential. It was, as I previously explained, late to various missteps. And by the time it came to market, it was already a generation behind in chip technology. Further complicating matters, there was a manufacturing defect in the vector coprocessor. They suffered from thermal shock, and if they were powered down, they would cool off and crack. Our flagship installation at Los Alamos National Lab proved troublesome, frequently down from repairs. In addition, we did not have the engineering resources to track the ever-advancing curve of semiconductor performance, and were soon selling a machine based on obsolescent technology. And then the Cold War ended and the money dried up. We had been the darlings of DARPA and received the lion's share of high-performance computing funds, but that came to an end as IBM and other competitors applied political pressure to distribute the money in a more equitable fashion. And then Cheryl, the CEO, and Danny, the chief technologist, had a falling out. It ripped the company apart at a time when our survival was in doubt. Soon it was every man for himself with political intrigue and backstabbing. It was at about this time that Dave Wallace, realizing that the situation was beyond saving, left the company to take a position with NEC Research. I declined to join him. I was dedicated to the company and held on to the bitter end. I was able to complete to the benchmark for MCI, but with the company headed for bankruptcy, they pulled out of the sale. The final blow came when we lost a bid to supply a machine to the Maui Supercomputing Center. In 1994, the company declared bankruptcy and everything I had built in my 11 years there went down with the ship. And this is the seventh lesson I would like to share with you. There may come a time when disaster strikes and you have to pick yourself up off the ground and start over. It's then that you will truly be tested. Have courage, have faith in yourself. The sun will rise again. All right, what now? It was the fall of 1994, and for the first and only time in my life, I found myself out of work. I had many options. I could have stayed with the remnants of thinking machines. I could have joined Dave at NEC. I could have gotten a job elsewhere in the industry. I could have transitioned to academia. The decision I made was about to be the most important one of my career. But there was not any doubt in my mind at the time. I had caught the entrepreneur bug, and what I wanted to do was to start a company to continue my work in parallel data processing, so that's what I did. I found myself with several other friends, mostly from the business supercomputing group, sitting in Cheryl's basement trying to figure out what we were going to do. Over a period of months, we sorted through various possibilities, any of which could plausibly have paid off. One option was to revive my work in information retrieval. I was still considered one of the leading experts in parallel text search, and it is tempting to think that I might have been the one to found Google. However, we did not have a revenue model, and lacking that critical business insight, it is unlikely that we would have succeeded. We also considered commercializing the AI work I had done with Dave, and perhaps some of you think it was foolish to have passed up that opportunity. But 1994 was the depth of the AI winter, and the market was still not ripe for that technology. Steve Smith tried to make a business of it, commercializing Darwin, but it never went anywhere. I noticed, however, that both IBM and Oracle had brought out parallel databases running on top of commercially available parallel computers. I realized that their customers would need to get data out of their existing operational systems and into those databases. I had considerable expertise doing exactly that, and we decided to head in that direction. It was to prove a fortunate and wise decision. And this is the eighth lesson I would like to share with you. Starting a company requires a marriage of business insight and technical know-how. Lacking either, you will not succeed. But if you can spot a change in the market, figure out what unmet needs it will create, come up with a solution and a revenue model, and get there before anyone else, you might just make it. In January of 1985, we incorporated ab initio software with Cheryl as the CEO and rented a colonial-era farmhouse in Concord, Massachusetts. We had no money, we had no infrastructure, we had no legacy of code on which to build. All we had was a vision for a new kind of software, a scalable system for general-purpose business computing, which we named the cooperating system. This was in the early days of Linux. None of the massive suite of packages and infrastructure existed. All we had was a compiler, Emacs, and the operating system, so we had to build everything from scratch. I found myself sitting at a keyboard with a blank screen and a vision of a product. Where do I start, I wonder? It was then that I made what was probably one of the best technical decisions of my career as a software engineer. I started with the test harness. We had learned the hard way that if you do not have a robust test suite, your software will never be reliable. Even if it works on the day you deliver it, sooner or later, everything gets broken, and if you do not have comprehensive tests, you will find yourself shipping software with regression after regression. I then went on the most epic coding binge of my life. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, pounding at the keyboard while hashing out the design and the architecture with the other team. We had no money and we weren't getting paid and the clock was ticking. We had a limited time frame before we exhausted our savings and we would have to get paying jobs. In that first year at the company, I think I wrote close to 100,000 lines of code, all of it tested, all of it robust, all of it still out there in production day in, day out, more than 25 years later. And this is the 9th lesson I would like to share with you. Everything revolves around testing. It is by far the most important aspect of software engineering. Despite the immense pressure we were under to show results, we did not cut corners there. When we finally had a product, it worked, and more importantly, we had established on day one a culture of testing, which continues to this day. Before moving on, I'll tell you just a little about the cooperating system. Next slide. What's that? Well, there we go. Got my pictures now. Before moving on, I'll tell you a little about the cooperating system, which continues to be our flagship product. It is based on a paradigm known as flow-based programming, in which you drag reusable components onto a canvas and link them up by drawing lines between them. This invention did not simply pop out of nowhere. I learned about the parallel data flow model from the database community, specifically from David DeWitt's Gamma project, and I was also familiar with flow-based programming environment called AVS, which Lou Tucker had adapted for use on the connection machine. I put the two ideas together, and thus was born the cooperating system. The data flow paradigm proved to be an ideal one for what we wanted to do. It supported various forms of data parallelism in a natural, easy to understand package. In addition, the data flow model solved one of the key problems in parallel computing, interprocessor communication. The connection machine used custom hardware to achieve microsecond scale latencies in message passing, but we didn't do that as practical on the platforms we were targeting. Data flow solves this problem because data can get buffered along the way, turning a latency problem into a bandwidth problem, something which is much easier to address. Superficially, a data flow graph looks like a query plan of a relational database, with joins, rollups, and so forth. But what is this other stuff? Real applications need to address error processing, exception handling, logging, auditing, and many other things that are every bit as important as the primary logic. Graphs can become extremely complex as a result, but we introduced the notion of subgraphs, which are themselves composed of data flows. We found that this architecture scaled to extreme levels of complexity. On the right, I am showing an exploded view of a data flow graph of realistic complexity, with 9 levels of nesting, 33 subgraphs, and 259 components. Our ability to handle the complexities of real applications gave us a huge advantage in the marketplace and was every bit as critical to our success as our ability to process data in parallel. Soon we literally had acres of Dilberts sitting in their cubicles building parallel data flow applications. This was in 1998, 6 years before MapReduce. And this is the 10th level lesson I would like to share with you. Understand your marketplace, understand your customer needs, and sweat the details. Aim for the greatest degree of generality you can manage. By the end of 1995, we had enough of our product working to start showing it to people, and were able to raise money and get started in earnest. We assembled a team recruiting from our friends at Thinking Machines. We built the product, got it to the point where we could solve real problems at considerable scale. We hit the road. All of us became salesmen. Our first sale came via Stephen Brobst, a technology maven and consultant we'd gotten to know from our sales effort in the business supercomputing group. The second sale came from MCI. Remember the benchmark I did with them? Sure enough, they had bought IBM's database and they were struggling to get their data into it. We solved their problem and had another major sale. The sales kept coming in, and while it was always a struggle, we started showing a profit immediately. We were a business. As we grew, we came to the attention of companies infinitely larger than ourselves. IBM and Oracle, to name just two. They made a concerted effort to put us out of business. The enterprise computing market is a perilous place, full of dark alleys and sharp knives. Part of our survival strategy was to go dark. It's difficult to kill what you cannot see, and we would usually have at least a year in which they had no idea what we were doing, another year before they figured out how to claim they were doing what we were, and another year or two until they actually had a product which was never as good as what we offered. They would then give away their software for free, throw in free consulting, anything to get us thrown out of an account. It was difficult, but it forced us to develop the best possible products. The only way we could survive was to stay at least 2 steps ahead of the Goliaths who wanted to drive us out of business. It is difficult to compete with free. You have to be really good. We continue to succeed, swimming against the tide of so-called freeware. And this is the 11th lesson I would like to share with you. Never ever estimate the importance of the business and sales team. It takes a huge amount of legwork and considerable skill to sell software, and most of you cannot possibly imagine how difficult it is to succeed. A great business team with a mediocre product will usually beat a mediocre business team with a great product. We were lucky enough to have both. I could go on and on about ab initio, but most of what we do is still covered by strict non-disclosure agreements. And if I told you 1/10 of what we do today, we would be here all week. But here we are, 27 years after we incorporated, still growing, still innovating, still creating new products. I'd love to tell you what came out of my most recent coding binge. Yes, I'm still at it, but none of you are going to buy our products, and we still like to keep our competitors guessing. We now offer a comprehensive suite of enterprise computing software, including not just the cooperating system and other core processing technologies, but products for metadata management, data quality, business rules, test data generation, sensitive data masking. The list goes on and on. We have offices throughout the world, customers on every inhabited continent, and play a critical role in many of the largest, most prominent companies in banking, financial services, telecommunications, retail, and so forth. I suspect we are the most important company you've never heard of. Not many companies can handle the data volumes generated by, say, a cell phone network with 200 million subscribers and process it all in real time. I do not think most of you understand the sheer complexity of enterprise computing. One of our banking customers might operate in 50 countries. Some of those subsidiaries have grown by accretion, having bought dozens of other banks. Each of those banks will have had their own credit systems, loan portfolios, checking accounts, and so forth, each of which can involve dozens or hundreds of data feeds with scores of data elements each. By the time you get done, there are millions of individual data elements, and the bank has to use this data to file regulatory reports with severe penalties if they get the number wrongs and strict audits conducted by the feds. We made a boatload of money off of Sarbanes-Oxley. We love that legislation. So we never went public, we never sold the company. And why is that? It all goes back to where it began, at Thinking Machines. That was a special place, full of excitement and some incredibly talented, and I must say, incredibly nice people. No matter how smart you were, we would not hire you if you were a jerk. When Thinking Machines went bankrupt, it was the darkest day of our lives, but Cheryl, myself, and the others who went through that experience refused to give up. We rebuilt the culture and created a company that reflects our values, focused on our working family and our customers, a desire to build something that would stand up to the test of time. When you work with the same people for your entire career, as I have done, they become your family, and the preservation of that community with its culture of humanity, decency, and above all, excellence is at the top of our values. And that is the final and most important lesson I want to leave with you. It is good and important to make money. Without it, you cannot create and sustain a business, but if that is all you care about, you are missing the boat. The communities that we build and sustain throughout our careers are the true treasures in this life, and never forget it. And now I'd like to say a little bit about what I'm doing today. I'm still at ab initio, but I'm hanging up my keyboard. No more coding binges. I remain active, however, in architectural discussions. This has freed up my time for new interests, and so I have taken to writing science fiction. But what I am writing is less important than why, and I would like to share my concerns as to the disturbing trends that are the driving force behind my writing. I have, over the course of my career, been party to profound technological changes, as artificial intelligence, the internet, and parallel computing have gone from laboratory curiosities to a part of our daily lives, changing our society in ways that we're only beginning to understand. It is, on the whole, transformative and amazing in a positive way, with massive improvements to productivity and access to information. These changes have, however, destabilized our society in ways which we are only beginning to understand. Without social media, there is no Donald Trump. Without ubiquitous cell phone cameras, there is no Black Lives Matter. Think about that for a moment. There is no escaping the impact of what we have done, some of it for the better, some of it for the worse, and I feel that the deep divisions we are seeing in this country are in part a product of the changes in how we use information and to communicate amongst ourselves. These changes are ongoing, and I fear the worst is yet to come. In his seminal novel, 1984, George Orwell warned us of the dangers of the surveillance state, of what happens when Big Brother knows all, sees all, and has unlimited power to enforce his will upon us. And this is the thing that keeps me awake at night. We have, I fear, created the perfect instrument of oppression, the perfect tool for the enforcement of an authoritarian regime, far beyond the darkest nightmares of George Orwell. When I look at the potential abuses of these new technologies, I cannot help feeling like the atomic scientist who saw the fireball rising above Trinity and said, "My God, what have we done?" The AI surveillance state is upon us. It has arrived in China, as anyone with any understanding can tell you, and it is taking root here today within our own society. The internet companies have given their AIs the power to censor humans, to tell us what we may and may not say. I have been censored by AIs. My wife has been censored by AIs. Most of my friends have been censored by AIs, and I fear this is only the beginning. Where does it end? I don't know, but I'm frightened. Beware the AI surveillance state. It is already at hand. And so I will end this talk not with a lesson, but with a warning, using not my words, but those of George Orwell himself. Don't let it happen. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion and this talk.